free to leave one landowner and find work with another. Serfdom reached Western Europe around the 15th century and only reached Eastern Europe after the Black Death of the 14th century. The shortage of labor in the colonies often led to the kidnapping of people from Europe. Many of them were criminals and beggars. The normal term of contract would be 4 to 7 years, after which they would be free. The serf was the worst rewarded and fed and had few rights. Serfs were the poorest of the peasant class. In exchange for accommodation, serfs would grow crops for their masters and themselves. Debt bondage was another way of paying for freedom. Debt bondage means agreeing to be enslaved for a period of time. This was how most of the poor were able to pay their fares to come to the colonies. Peasants were low on the feudal system and had sworn an oath to their duke, earl, baron, or whoever owned the property, and they paid their tithes to the churches. Accommodations for peasants were dire. They lived on greens in small 2-room thatch houses. Depending on their status, they would have cows and goats, and these would often sleep with them during winter. In peasant homes, everyone was expected to work the fields, from toddlers to the elderly. They suffered all the plagues and had a basic diet of wheat, beans, barley, peas, oats, and vegetables. They typically had only one set of clothing of rough wool and linen. Noble women were only allowed to own land if they inherited it from their father or a husband. When the noble was away, the wife led the manor and was allowed to send knights into battle. The average woman started childbirth around 16, and on average they would have 7 to 9 pregnancies, with 3 or 4 of those children surviving to the age of 10. For women, the age of consent was 12, when they could become the property of their husbands. In Wales, women were allowed to divorce a husband for reasons of leprosy, bad breath, and impotence. In the 16th century, there was unprecedented persecution of women. Under the guidance of the church, unmarried and widowed women were often accused of witchcraft. During the 1674, Nordic countries saw the peak of hunting and killing of women. Between 1550 and 1650, over 30,000 persecutions of women accused of witchcraft took place. Children in Europe suffered immeasurably due to the exposure to war and violence, disease, malnutrition, abandonment, slavery, and infanticide. For relief, parents often sent their children to live as servants, where they often became victims of assault, rape, and murder. In the 14th and 15th century, there was a huge market for child slaves, as they cost the same as adults. A lord may have a padded bath for extra comfort when he traveled, but most people, especially the gentry and peasants working the land, washed very rarely, and if they did, they washed in small basins with jugs. With baths seen as a luxury and given the cost of heating the water, monks and gentry were prohibited from taking baths more than 2 or 3 times a year. Formal schooling was confined to the middle classes who taught their children at home. The peasants and working class ordinarily didn't go to school because they couldn't afford the fees. Others attended charity schools run by the churches. Literacy levels were very low in the 15th and 16th century, yet by the 17th century, every man had a copy of the Holy Bible. In 1516, Thomas More's publication, Utopia, of an imaginary world in the Western Hemisphere, gave Europeans an image of the new world where they could be free and escape the misery in their home countries. This image of the new world became a dream for peasants and working class people alike to gain economic freedom and wealth and status. In the Cape, material culture played a huge role in establishing identity for the European as a symbol of status and identity. It is said that European women and girls married off at the age of 13 and never stopped complaining until they returned to their home country to show off their looted riches. Imagine what they saw on arrival in the Cape: pristine land uninterrupted by European greed, gluttony, famine and war, healthy people without disease or disability, and an abundance of food, something they have never experienced in their lives. The Cape leadership was quick to ensure that the European beggar, mercenary, leper, convict, stowaway, peasant, and serf learned the art of being superior by the image they projected. New features influencing literature, dance, and fashion was as important as music and art education. Beyond their wildest dreams, these disposable Europeans no longer wanted or welcome in Europe those escaping famine and disease, overpopulation, dangerous living conditions, forced labor, child victimization, war and religious strife, kidnapped beggars, poor and orphaned individuals became masters and madams in manor houses and farms with wet nurses, dry nurses, slaves, butlers, gardeners, chauffeurs, and servants. 2017 marked the longest period of time without European wars. In 2,000 years, 60 years of peace was celebrated, with the last war ending in 1945. In South Africa, conflict ended in 1994. European descendants in South Africa seems to be struggling with this peacetime reality, as if there is some form of intergenerational traumatic need for conflict. While still enjoying absolute ill-gotten privilege and wealth looted, they display themselves as victims of genocide and land seizures. Did Europeans heal from 2,000 years of war, famine, floods, and disease by simply colonizing, exploiting, creating genocide? Did they? Did inflicting 500 years of trauma, land grabs, rape, massacres, slavery, and brutality heal them? Kai Gagangs for your time, Cape of Storms, Table Bay, Falls Bay, Cape of Good Hope, settler, it was not yours to take. I am Atakwa, and I was born extinct.